All right, welcome back, grade 10s. We are going to talk about externality today. Externality is the unintended consequences of your actions. So, in order to learn the term externality, we're going to be looking at the cultural externality of economic globalization. So, the unintended cultural impact of someone doing business economically. So, in order to learn the term externality, and to explore the unintended consequences of globalization, we're going to be looking at the story of the Lubicon Cree and how they connect to the Yom Kippur War and the OPEC crisis. So the main message we're trying to send here is that globalization is the interconnectedness of mankind, but sometimes when we interconnect, unanticipated things happen. We call that the butterfly effect, right? The butterfly effect. That a butterfly halfway across the world can, flap its wings, and the winds of change will become like a tsunami or a tornado or a cyclone or a hurricane, depending on which part of the world you're in. It will become a hurricane of change, right? So with globalization, we often see the butterfly effect. This idea that something that seems unrelated to you, oh, that's happening somewhere. You might not even know it's happening, but you will feel the winds of change. So we're going to learn that here too. So we're learning about externality, and we're learning about the butterfly effect, and we're seeing the interconnectedness of mankind, all in this one case study. So the case study could go back thousands of years, to be honest, but we're going to go back to 1948. So in 1948, the modern nation of Israel was formed. So the modern nation of Israel was formed as an Israeli Jewish nation, but it's surrounded by Arab nations that don't really recognize the legitimacy of Israel to be a Jewish nation. That much of what is present-day Israel was once part of the Ottoman Empire. But when the Ottomans were defeated in World War I, then the victors of World War I, the British, the French, they had to decide on, what nation is this now? Where is Syria? Where is Lebanon? Where is Jordan? What will become Iraq and Iran? Well, these things were decided by the victors of World War I as they divided up the Ottoman Empire, but a part of the empire was what is present-day Israel. But when the UN looked at the Israeli mandate, or the Palestine mandate, they couldn't get consensus on whose land it should be. The Arabs, as we can see here, the Arabs wanted to see it as an Arab state. And they didn't want to see the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. So when the United Nations looked at creating a Jewish state, many of the Arab countries surrounding Israel were unhappy. So at the birth of Israel as a modern nation, its neighbors didn't want it to be there. It's kind of key to the story. But also key to the story is that this wasn't like the first time there's hostility. It's the birth of the modern nation of Israel. But you can go back centuries. You can go back into the time of Christ. You can go back before the time of Christ into the Old Testament. And you can see that in Israel, in the Holy Lands, there's been a conflict between what we identify today as Israeli Jews and what we identify today as Arabs. You can go back to the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael. So it's a very long struggle between two peoples. 1948, Israel is formed as a Jewish nation, and its Arab neighbors, they're not happy about that. So they go to war a number of times against each other. And Israel keeps winning. And on paper, they shouldn't. On paper, Israel is smaller, less populated. The Arab countries that surround it should be able to do what they're trying to do, which is drive Israel into the sea. And they almost did that in 1973. So in 1973, we end up seeing what many would call like a sneak attack, right? That the Arab countries, there's a coalition, they decide to invade Israel while Israel is distracted. So they're distracted because the Israeli Jews are celebrating a very important religious holiday called Yom Kippur. And even though the Israelis see the Arabs maneuvering their armies close to their borders, they just assumed, well, they can't be expecting to attack us. We've already beat them up a number of times. They won't attack us again. But the Arab coalition does attack them and nearly drives the Israeli Jews into the Mediterranean Sea, accomplishing their objective of destroying the Israeli Jewish state. But somehow, the Israeli Jews turn the tide of the war, and they win the battle. They win the war. It's amazing, amazing stories. And then for the Arab countries that end up losing the Yom Kippur War, they start asking themselves the question, well, how did we lose? Well, Israel has strong friends. And maybe the strongest is America. And now the Arab countries are saying, how can we attack America? How can we attack them because they helped our enemy? Well, we can't fight them militarily because they'll win. We need to attack them economically. Well, 1973 is a key war economically because this is the first year the United States goes from a net exporter to a net importer of oil. They need oil from outside America. So the Arab countries, many of them oil rich, decide the best way to attack Israel's allies is to stop selling as much oil. That's created oil crisis. That's created an oil shortage. Let's see the price of oil skyrocket. That'll cripple their economies, cause unemployment. That's exactly what happens in the 1970s. So this is globalization. There's a conflict between Arabs and Israeli Jews happening thousands of kilometers away. People in Alberta might not even have heard of what is an Israeli Jew. The Lubicon Cree have never heard of them before. They don't know the story of Isaac and Ishmael. But a conflict that has been going on for thousands of years, happening thousands of kilometers away, is going to change their lifestyle. That's globalization. So the OPEC countries, these Arab countries that have a lot of oil, they decide to cut how much oil they're spending or they're selling on the world market, and it causes an economic inflationary crisis. Because as the price of oil goes up, the price of all these products that are made by oil also goes up. And as we can see here, so many products need oil as an ingredient in them. Anything that's plastic at this time is made from oil. And if it's not made from oil, certainly you needed oil to move it, to transport it. So oil was one of those vital commodities, so much so that we called it the lifeblood of the economy. If oil's the lifeblood of the economy, and certain countries, the OPEC countries, Arab countries, had a near monopoly on selling it, then they can punish the world by selling less of it and driving the price up. So that's what they do. They drive the price up. And you can see the price of oil just explodes. And with it, we have inflation and unemployment. So what we end up seeing is something called stagflation. Stagflation is this rare thing happening economically. Prices are going up, but we're not getting paid more, and our economy's not growing. Usually when prices are going up, that's a sign of a growth period. Boom. Prices are going up, but people are making more money, so it's all really good. But in the 1970s, prices were going up because the cost of oil went up, and we needed oil to build or to transport everything. So we had this stagflation. It's like a double-headed dragon of economics. Thank you, by the way. Hi. Who? Caleb? Yeah. So it's the double-headed dragon of economics for sure. So how does this connect to Alberta? Well, you know that Alberta has oil. And we have a lot of oil that is caught in the sands, in the oil or tar sands of the north. So much so that Alberta has the third largest oil reserves in the world after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. But we also have oil that isn't in the oil sands, but it's more valuable oil, really. It's cleaner oil. It's in the ground, and by the late 1970s, people needed it. They're like, you know what? Oil is too expensive. Saudi Arabians don't want to sell it to us anymore. The Iranians don't want to sell it to anymore. In 1979, they have a revolution. They hate America. They're chanting death to America. The Iraqis are selling less. The Kuwaitis are selling less. We need oil to make up for the OPEC crisis, the shortage. So they go start looking for oil close to where they found it before. So we found it in Leduc before. Leduc, Alberta has had oil. So now we're going to look in other places in Alberta. Well, there's this territory where the Lubicon live. It's a indigenous area where people live a very traditional life. They like to trap and hunt and things like that. They're living like they may have lived hundreds of years ago. But there might be oil in there. So let's go in there and look for oil. So when they go in there and look for oil, they disrupt the traditional lifestyle. They disrupt the trapping and the hunting and the fishing to the extent that the Lubicon Cree, who had before the oil exploration began, the Lubicon Cree who had before been self-sufficient, now they needed help from the government. Before, they could feed themselves through hunting and trapping and fishing, but now the oil companies moved in, and guess what? The animals ran away. So now we can't hunt anymore. And the water became not fish-friendly. So now we can't feed ourselves that way. So it went from a people that were completely independent of government to 90% of the Lubicon Cree were on welfare in the beginning of the 1980s. That's a cultural externality of economic globalization. And it's a butterfly effect. Something's happening on the other side of the world. Lubicon Cree has never even heard of these people before. They're out hunting and fishing and trapping, living a traditional lifestyle. Eventually, a consequence, an externality of it comes to them. Why does it come to them? Because there could be oil on Lubicon territory. It turns out there was. So when the oil exploration comes to oil actually production, then you end up bringing in dozens and then hundreds of outsiders, and they contaminate the culture, but they also disrupt the cultural practices to the extent that they can't live that way anymore. That's globalization. That's the butterfly effect. That's externality. And that's how economics can lead to cultural contamination. And that's a story from Central Alberta. That's the Lubicon Cree. Question?
Did we, like, oil is more or less an oil-based province?
Alberta is an oil-based province. Yeah, oil, natural gas, farming and stuff, but it definitely, big two would be oil and natural gas, yeah.
Would that have been our basis before 1973?
Not as much, right? So because of the OPEC crisis, Alberta boomed. I remember living in Beaver Lodge in northern Alberta, watching people at that time burning $100 bills to light their cigars because they had so much money. It was a ridiculous time to be alive. Why did we get the Oilers? Why did the Edmonton Oilers become an NHL team? Because we had that much wealth in Alberta in the 70s. So there was oil exploration in this area, in the Leduc area, going back to the 1940s. Anybody know when the first strike in Leduc was? 1948, maybe? Let's look it up. But it wasn't as massive until the opportunity to take some of that world share from the Arabs. I'm going to say 48. This should be Alberta knowledge. Like as Albertans, we should have to know this. Leduc first. It doesn't even come up. Like
Oil well.
1946. So Leduc number one, right? So before 46, obviously we weren't an oil and natural gas province. And between 46 and 73, we increasingly became so. But because of the OPEC crisis, it gave us an opportunity to become a larger player on the world scale. Okay, I'm going to stop the video at that point.